The stallion reared up on his hind legs for the third time that morning, his wild eyes rolling white with terror. And Jake Maddox knew if he did not get this beast under control soon, he would lose the most valuable horse he had ever owned and probably his reputation along with it. The spring of 1883 had brought Jake back to Redemption, Texas with nothing but a worn saddle, $200 in his pocket, and Thunder, a magnificent black stallion he had won in a poker game up in Abilene. The horse was worth 10 times what Jake owned, with a bloodline that traced back to some of the finest racing stock in Kentucky, but the animal had one fatal flaw. Thunder trusted no one, spooked at shadows, and had already kicked 2 stable hands badly enough to send them to the doctor. Jake had been working with him for 3 weeks now, and they were no closer to an understanding than the day they met. "Easy now," Jake murmured, keeping his voice low and steady even as sweat dripped down his back under the harsh Texas sun. The corral dust kicked up in clouds around them, coating his dark hair and the stubble on his jaw. At 26, Jake had broken more horses than he could count, working ranches from Montana to the Mexican border, but Thunder was different. There was intelligence in those dark eyes, and pain too, like something had broken the animal's trust long before Jake had ever laid eyes on him. Thunder's hooves crashed down and he bolted to the far side of the corral, snorting and tossing his magnificent head. Jake wiped his forehead with the back of his hand and considered his options. He could sell the horse, cut his losses, but that felt like admitting defeat. He could keep trying, risk getting himself or someone else hurt, or he could ask for help, which rankled his pride something fierce. "Having trouble," the voice came from behind him, feminine and tinged with amusement. Jake turned to find a woman leaning against the corral fence, her arms crossed on the top rail. She wore a simple calico dress the color of cornflowers, her dark blonde hair pulled back in a practical braid that hung over one shoulder. But it was her eyes that caught him, green as spring grass and sharp with intelligence. She was young, probably around 23 or 24, with sun-kissed skin that spoke of time spent outdoors rather than in a parlor. "Nothing I cannot handle," Jake replied, more defensively than he intended. The woman's lips quirked in a smile that somehow managed to be both knowing and kind. "That horse has been dancing circles around you for the better part of an hour. I have been watching from the mercantile across the street." Heat that had nothing to do with the Texas sun crept up Jake's neck. "You got a better idea, miss, maybe." She ducked through the fence rails with an easy grace that surprised him, landing light on her feet in the corral. Thunder immediately tensed, his ears flicking back. "Ma'am, I do not think that is wise," Jake started, moving toward her with his hand outstretched. The last thing he needed was a woman getting hurt in his corral. She held up one hand, stopping him in his tracks, and turned her full attention to Thunder. She did not approach the horse directly, did not make any sudden movements. Instead, she simply stood there, still as a stone, and began to hum. It was not any tune Jake recognized, just a low, melodic sound that seemed to vibrate in the air between her and the stallion. Thunder's ears pricked forward. His wild eyes settled on the woman, and Jake watched in amazement as the tension slowly drained from the horse's powerful body. The woman took one small step forward, still humming that strange, wordless melody. Thunder did not bolt. She took another step and another, moving with infinite patience. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Jake hardly dared to breathe. The woman was close enough now to touch Thunder, and she slowly extended her hand, palm up, still humming. The stallion stretched his neck out, nostrils flaring as he caught her scent. Then, miracle of miracles, he lowered his great head and allowed her to touch his muzzle. "There now," she whispered, running her hand along Thunder's face with gentle, confident strokes. "Nobody here wants to hurt you, handsome boy. You are safe now." Thunder blew out a long breath and actually leaned into her touch, his eyes half closing in what looked like contentment. Jake had never seen anything like it. This woman, this stranger, had accomplished in 15 minutes what he had failed to do in 3 weeks. She turned to look at Jake over her shoulder, and the smile she gave him was radiant. He has been hurt before. Beaten, I would guess, probably by a man. He just needs to know he can trust again. "Who are you?" Jake asked, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. Something in his chest had shifted when she smiled, a feeling he could not quite name. "Caroline Winters," she replied, still stroking Thunder's neck. "My father owns the mercantile. We moved here from Missouri last fall." Jake removed his hat, running his fingers through his sweat-dampened hair in a gesture that was half respect, half nervousness. "Jake Maddox, and I am in your debt, Miss Winters. Caroline, please." She gave Thunder a final pat and stepped back, and the horse actually followed her a few steps, seeking more of her attention. "And you are not in my debt. I like horses better than most people anyway." That startled a laugh out of Jake, genuine and surprised. "I know the feeling." Caroline's eyes met his again, and Jake felt that strange, shifting sensation in his chest intensify. She was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. There was a competence about her, a quiet strength that drew him like a magnet. And the way she had handled Thunder, fearless and gentle at the same time, spoke to something deep in his soul. "Would you teach me?" The words were out before Jake could think better of them. To calm him like that, Caroline tilted her head, studying him with those keen green eyes. "I could try. But it is not really about technique, Mr. Maddox. It is about patience and understanding what the other creature needs." "Jake," he corrected, "and I can be patient when it matters. Can you?" There was a challenge in her voice, but also curiosity. "Yes, ma'am." Jake held her gaze, willing her to see that he meant it. "When something is important enough, I can wait as long as it takes." Something flickered in Caroline's expression, a spark of interest that sent warmth flooding through Jake's veins. "All right then, Jake, I will help you with your horse. But I have conditions." "Name them." "I work in my father's store most days, but I am free in the mornings before 9 and in the evenings after 6. Those are the only times I can spare, and if Thunder starts to get agitated, we stop immediately. I will not risk his well-being or ours just to prove a point." "Agreed." Jake stepped forward, extending his hand. "Partners?" Caroline looked at his outstretched hand for a moment, then placed her smaller hand in his. Her grip was firm, her palm slightly calloused from work. The contact sent electricity racing up Jake's arm. "Partners," she confirmed. They stood there for a heartbeat too long, hands clasped, eyes locked. Thunder whinnied softly, breaking the spell, and Caroline pulled her hand back with a slight flush coloring her cheeks. "I should get back," she said, glancing toward the mercantile. "Father will wonder where I have gone, but I will see you tomorrow morning, just after dawn. I will be here." Jake would have agreed to meet her at midnight in a thunderstorm if she had asked. Caroline smiled again, that luminous expression that made his heart stutter, and ducked back through the fence rails. Jake watched her walk across the dusty street, her braids swaying with each step. When she reached the mercantile door, she paused and looked back at him. Even from this distance, he could see her smile. Thunder nudged Jake's shoulder, nearly knocking him off balance. Jake turned to look at the stallion, who regarded him with what he could have sworn was amusement in those dark eyes. "So you like her too, do you?" Jake murmured, scratching Thunder's neck. The horse did not pull away. "Cannot say I blame you, boy. Cannot say I blame you at all." That night, Jake lay in his rented room above the saloon, staring at the ceiling and thinking about green eyes and gentle hands. He had not come to redemption looking for anything but work and a fresh start. He certainly had not been looking for a woman. After what happened with Mary Beth in Kansas, he had sworn off romance entirely, convinced that love was a fool's game and he was better off alone. But Caroline Winters had walked into his corral and turned his world sideways in the span of 20 minutes. The way she had handled Thunder, the confidence and compassion she had shown, had struck something deep inside him. And then there was her smile, the intelligence in her eyes, the feel of her hand in his. Jake rolled over and punched his pillow into a more comfortable shape. He was being ridiculous. She was just helping him with his horse. That was all. He could not afford to get distracted, to start building dreams that would only come crashing down. He had work to do, a reputation to rebuild, a future to carve out of this harsh Texas landscape. But when sleep finally claimed him, he dreamed of a woman with golden hair and a voice that could tame wild things. And he woke the next morning with her name on his lips. True to her word, Caroline appeared at the corral just as the sun was painting the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold. She wore a different dress today, practical brown cotton with the sleeves rolled up to her elbows, and she carried a small basket over one arm. "Good morning," she called, her voice bright despite the early hour. "I brought apples. Horses love apples." Jake had been up since before dawn, grooming Thunder and cleaning the corral, nervous as a schoolboy before his first dance. "Morning, Miss Caroline. That is thoughtful of you." "Just Caroline, remember?" She set the basket on a fence post and climbed into the corral. Thunder was already watching her, his ears pricked forward with interest. "Hello again, handsome. Did you miss me?" Jake could have sworn the horse nodded. Caroline laughed, a sound like water over stones, and pulled an apple from her basket. She held it out flat on her palm, and Thunder walked right up to her and took it delicately, crunching with obvious pleasure. "See how he came to me," Caroline said, glancing at Jake. "That is trust. Yesterday I had to go to him. Today he chose to come to me. That is progress." "How do I get him to trust me like that?" Jake asked, moving closer but keeping his distance so as not to spook the horse. "You have to let him set the pace." Caroline stroked Thunder's neck as he finished his apple. "No forcing, no rushing, just patience and consistency. Let him know that you are safe, that being near you means good things happen." Over the next hour, Caroline coached Jake through her approach. She had him stand still while Thunder investigated him, had him offer treats without expectation, had him hum that same wordless melody she had used the day before. It felt foolish at first, a grown man humming like a child, but Jake followed her instructions to the letter. And slowly, incredibly, Thunder began to relax around him. "You are doing wonderfully," Caroline said, her eyes shining with approval. Jake felt ridiculously pleased by her praise, like he had just won a prize at the county fair. They worked with Thunder every morning for the next 2 weeks, and Jake found himself living for those dawn sessions. It was not just about the horse anymore, though watching Thunder's transformation was gratifying beyond words. It was about Caroline. The way she laughed when Thunder tried to steal apples from her basket. The way she explained things with such patience and enthusiasm. The way the rising sun caught in her hair and turned it to spun gold. They talked while they worked, sharing stories about their lives. Jake learned that Caroline had grown up on a farm in Missouri, that her mother had died when she was 16, that she had been helping her father run the mercantile ever since. She loved reading, especially poetry, and she had a younger brother named Thomas who was studying law back east. In turn, Jake told her about his years working cattle drives, the ranches he had worked on, the places he had seen. He told her about growing up in West Texas, losing his own mother to fever when he was 12, learning to rope and ride from his father before the old man died in a stampede when Jake was 19. He did not tell her about Mary Beth, about the humiliation of being left at the altar for a man with more money and better prospects. That wound was still too raw, too shameful. "You have lived an interesting life," Caroline said one morning as they watched Thunder trot freely around the corral, no longer skittish or afraid. "Always moving, never settling down. Do you ever want to stay in one place?" Jake looked at her, at the genuine curiosity in her face, and felt his heart clench. "I never did before," he admitted, "but lately I have been thinking it might be nice to have somewhere to call home." Caroline's cheeks flushed pink and she looked away, but not before Jake saw the smile tugging at her lips. "I think that would be nice," she said softly. The evening sessions were different from the mornings. The work day was done, and there was a relaxed quality to their time together. Sometimes Caroline would bring lemonade her father had made, and they would sit on the fence rail after working with Thunder, drinking the tart, sweet liquid and watching the sun set over the western plains. "My father wants to know when he can meet you properly," Caroline said one evening, swinging her legs idly as they sat side by side. "I have been talking about you so much, he thinks I have lost my mind." Jake's heart jumped into his throat. Meeting her father felt significant, official. "What have you been telling him?" "That you are a good horseman, that you listen and learn quickly, that you are kind to animals and polite to me." Caroline glanced at him from the corner of her eye. "That you have a nice smile." "Caroline," Jake breathed, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. She turned to face him fully, her green eyes serious. "I know we have not known each other long, Jake, but I like spending time with you, more than I have liked spending time with anyone in a very long while." "I like spending time with you too," Jake said, his voice rough with emotion. "More than that, if I am being honest. Caroline, I think about you every moment we are apart. You are the first thing on my mind when I wake up and the last thing before I sleep. I know I do not have much to offer. I am just a cowboy with a horse and a dream of maybe starting my own ranch someday. But if you would allow me to court you properly, I would count myself the luckiest man in Texas." Caroline's smile bloomed like a flower opening to the sun. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, Jake. I would like that very much." Jake wanted to kiss her right then, wanted it so badly his hands shook with the need to touch her. But this was too important, too precious to rush. Instead, he took her hand in his, threading their fingers together, and lifted it to his lips. He pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "Thank you," he whispered. They sat there as the stars began to emerge overhead, hands clasped, shoulders touching, and Jake thought he had never been happier in his entire life. Meeting Caroline's father the following Sunday was nerve-wracking in a way Jake had not expected. Robert Winters was a tall, spare man with shrewd eyes and graying hair, and he looked Jake over with the assessing gaze of someone who had sized up plenty of men in his day. "Mr. Maddox," he said, shaking Jake's hand with a firm grip. "My daughter speaks highly of you." "Sir, I hope to live up to her good opinion," Jake replied, acutely aware of his worn Sunday suit and scuffed boots. The Winters family might not be wealthy, but they were respectable merchants, while Jake was just a drifter with a difficult horse. Robert Winters nodded slowly. "Caroline tells me you are planning to start a ranch." "Yes, sir, I have been saving my money for years. I am close to having enough to put a down payment on some land north of town. Nothing fancy, just enough acres to raise some cattle and horses." "Horses like that black stallion?" "Yes, sir, Thunder has come a long way. Thanks to your daughter, he is gentle as a lamb now. I have already had 3 offers to buy him and 2 requests for breeding services once he is fully trained." Jake straightened his shoulders, meeting Robert's gaze directly. "I am a hard worker, Mr. Winters. I do not gamble, I do not drink to excess, and I mean to make something of myself. And I care deeply for Caroline. I would never do anything to hurt her or bring her shame." Robert studied him for a long moment, then his stern expression softened into something like approval. "I believe you, son. Caroline is a good judge of character, and if she trusts you, then I am inclined to do the same. You may court my daughter with the understanding that I expect you to treat her with respect and honor." "Of course, sir, thank you." Relief flooded through Jake, making him almost lightheaded. "Now sit down and have some coffee," Robert said, gesturing to the table. "Caroline has been baking all morning, and if we do not eat some of these pies, she is likely to feed them all to that horse of yours." Jake laughed and took the offered seat. And when Caroline emerged from the kitchen with flour on her nose and happiness shining in her eyes, he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. The courtship that followed was the sweetest period of Jake's life. He took Caroline to the church social and danced with her under the stars, marveling at how perfectly she fit in his arms. They went on picnics by the creek, where Caroline would read poetry aloud while Jake listened to the music of her voice. He met her friends and she met his, and gradually they became known around Redemption as a matched pair. Thunder, meanwhile, had transformed completely. The wild, unmanageable stallion had become a responsive, intelligent mount who answered to the lightest touch. Jake began training him properly, teaching him to respond to leg cues and voice commands, and the horse proved to be everything Jake had hoped. Word spread quickly about the magnificent black stallion, and soon Jake had a waiting list of people who wanted him to train their horses or breed their mares to thunder. "You are going to be able to buy that land sooner than you thought," Caroline said one evening as they walked through town after dinner at her father's house. She had her hand tucked into the crook of Jake's elbow, and the simple contact made him feel 10 feet tall. "Maybe so," Jake agreed. "Mr. Henderson at the bank said he would be willing to give me a loan if I can put down 40%. I am almost there." "That is wonderful, Jake." Caroline stopped walking and turned to face him. They were standing in the shadow of the church, away from the street lamps and curious eyes. "I am so proud of you. I could not have done it without you," Jake said honestly. "You saved Thunder, you gave me the tools to understand him, and you gave me something else." "What is that?" "A reason to build something lasting instead of just drifting from job to job." Jake took both her hands in his heart pounding. "Caroline, I know it has only been 3 months since we met, but I am more certain of this than I have been of anything in my life. I love you. I am completely, desperately in love with you." Caroline's breath caught, and in the moonlight Jake could see tears sparkling in her eyes. "Jake, I love you too. I think I have loved you since that first day when you looked at me like I was performing some kind of miracle with thunder." "You were," Jake said softly. "You are." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheeks. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," Caroline whispered. Jake lowered his head slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind, but she rose up on her toes to meet him halfway. Their lips touched, gentle at first, a sweet question and answer. Then Caroline made a soft sound in the back of her throat and pressed closer, and the kiss deepened into something that made Jake's blood sing in his veins. She tasted like the apple pie they had eaten for dessert and like something uniquely her. And Jake knew he could kiss her for the rest of his life and never grow tired of it. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I know I should wait, should do this properly with a ring and a formal proposal, but I cannot hold it in anymore. Marry me, Caroline, be my wife and my partner and the mother of my children. Help me build that ranch into a home. Say yes." "Yes," Caroline laughed, tears streaming down her face now. "Yes, yes, yes. Of course I will marry you." Jake kissed her again and again until they were both dizzy with joy. Then he took her hand and they practically ran back to the mercantile to tell her father the news. Robert Winters took the announcement with equanimity, as if he had been expecting it all along. "I suppose you will want to wait until you have that ranch," he said, but his eyes were kind. "Actually, sir, with your permission, I would like to marry Caroline as soon as possible," Jake replied. "I have enough saved now to make the down payment on the Jensen property. The house needs work, but it is sound. I can support a wife, and I promise you I will work every day of my life to make sure Caroline never regrets choosing me." Robert looked at his daughter, who was glowing with happiness, and nodded. "Then you have my blessing. Welcome to the family, Jake." They were married 6 weeks later in the little white church on the edge of Redemption. Caroline wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her slender frame, and she carried wildflowers that Jake had picked himself from the fields around their new property. Jake wore a new suit that Caroline had helped him pick out, and when he saw her walking down the aisle on her father's arm, he had to blink back tears. "You are so beautiful," he whispered when she took her place beside him. "You are not so bad yourself, Cowboy," she whispered back, and they grinned at each other like children with a secret. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Jake's voice shook slightly when he made his vows, promising to love and cherish Caroline for all the days of his life. Caroline's voice was clear and strong when she promised the same, her green eyes locked on his, when the preacher pronounced them man and wife. Jake kissed her with all the love in his heart, and the small congregation erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was held at the Winters house, with half the town in attendance. There was food and music and dancing, and Jake waltzed Caroline around the cleared parlor until they were both breathless and laughing. Thunder, tied up outside with a white ribbon braided into his mane, whinnied periodically as if adding his congratulations. As the sun began to set, Jake and Caroline made their escape, riding together on Thunder's broad back toward their new home. The ranch house was modest, just 4 rooms and a covered porch, but Caroline had been helping Jake fix it up over the past weeks. They had painted the walls, repaired the roof, and filled it with simple furniture. It was not much, but it was theirs. Jake lifted Caroline down from Thunder's back and carried her across the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition of it. He set her down gently in their new bedroom, where the last rays of sunlight streamed through the curtains Caroline had sewn herself. "Welcome home, Mrs. Maddox," Jake said softly. "I like the sound of that," Caroline replied, reaching up to loop her arms around his neck. "I love you, Jake. I love you too, more than words can say." Jake kissed her again, tender and deep, pouring everything he felt into the contact. "Thank you for taking a chance on a cowboy with a wild horse and not much else. Thank you for seeing me as more than just the merchant's daughter," Caroline countered. "Thank you for letting me help you with Thunder. Thank you for being patient and kind and true." They stood there in the golden light, holding each other, and Jake marveled at how his life had changed. 6 months ago he had been alone and aimless, convinced that love was not for him. Now he had a wife he adored, a home to build, and a future bright with promise. "Come on," Caroline said, taking his hand. "Let us go take care of Thunder and then make dinner together. I want to start this marriage the way I hope it continues, working side by side." Jake would have been content to stay in that bedroom with his new wife, but he loved her practicality, her insistence on doing things right. So they went out together and got Thunder settled in his new stable, which Jake had built with his own hands. The horse nuzzled Caroline affectionately, and she fed him apple slices while Jake brushed him down. "He brought us together, you know," Caroline said, watching Thunder with affection. "If you had never won him in that poker game, you might never have come to redemption. And I might never have met you." "I do not believe that," Jake said, coming to stand behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "I think we were meant to find each other one way or another. Thunder just helped speed things along." Caroline leaned back against him with a contented sigh. "I like that idea, that we were always meant to be together." They stood there for a while, watching the stars come out over their land, their horse, their future. Then they went inside and made dinner together, moving around their small kitchen with the easy coordination of 2 people who fit. They ate by lamplight, talking and laughing, making plans for the ranch and their life together. When they finally went to bed, Jake held Caroline close and thought about how she had calmed his horse and then his heart. She had taken all the restless, rootless parts of him and given them a place to belong. And he would spend the rest of his life making sure she never regretted it. The first year of their marriage was hard work but deeply satisfying. Jake took on every training job he could get, building a reputation as the best horseman in 3 counties. Thunder sired several foals that first season, bringing in additional income. Caroline continued working at her father's store a few days a week, contributing her earnings to their savings, and spent the rest of her time improving their home and helping Jake with the horses. They acquired more land, expanding their holdings piece by piece. Jake built additional corrals and a larger stable. Caroline planted a vegetable garden and fruit trees, determined to make their ranch as self-sufficient as possible. In the evenings, they would sit on their porch and watch the sunset, Caroline reading aloud while Jake whittled or mended tack. "I am happy," Caroline said one evening, looking up from her book of poems. "So completely happy I sometimes worry it cannot last." Jake set down the bridle he was repairing and pulled her close. "It will last. We will make sure of it. Whatever comes, we will face it together." "Together," Caroline agreed, kissing him softly, As if to test their resolve, the next year brought challenges. A drought made water scarce and feed expensive. Several of Jake's clients could not afford to pay what they owed. Thunder developed a mild colic that had them both worried sick for 3 days until he recovered. But they weathered each difficulty side by side, never wavering in their commitment to each other or their dream. Then, in the 3rd spring of their marriage, Caroline told Jake she was expecting a baby. Jake was checking fence posts in the north pasture when she rode out to tell him, sitting astride Thunder with her skirts hiked up immodestly. The sight made him grin, as it always did. Caroline was a proper lady when the occasion called for it, but she was also a rancher's wife who was not afraid to get her hands dirty or break social conventions when necessary. "Jake," she called, her face flushed and her eyes sparkling. "Jake, I have news." He dropped his tools and strode over to help her down, catching her easily in his arms. "What is it? You look like you are about to burst." "I am with child," Caroline said, taking his hands and placing them on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby, Jake." In late October, the doctor thinks. Jake felt like all the air had been punched from his lungs. A baby. Their baby. A child made from their love who would grow up on this ranch they had built together. "Caroline," he managed, his voice thick with emotion. "Caroline, are you sure?" "As sure as I can be." She was laughing and crying at the same time. "Are you happy? I know we have not talked about it much, but I hope you are happy." "Happy?" Jake lifted her off her feet and spun her around, both of them laughing wildly. "I am beyond happy. I am ecstatic." "We are going to be parents." He set her down carefully, suddenly worried. "Should you be riding? Should you be out here at all? Should you not be resting?" "Jake, I am pregnant, not made of glass," Caroline said, but her eyes were soft with affection. "I feel perfectly fine." Better than fine, actually. Still, Jake insisted on riding back to the house with her, keeping Thunder to a gentle walk and holding Caroline secure in front of him. That night, they lay in bed talking about names and dreams for their child, about what kind of parents they wanted to be. "I want our children to know they are loved," Caroline said, her head resting on Jake's chest. "Not just told, but shown every day. I want them to grow up feeling safe and valued." "They will," Jake promised, his hand splayed protectively over her stomach. "I will make sure of it. This child and any others we are blessed with will know they are the most important things in our lives." Pregnancy suited Caroline. She bloomed like a rose, her skin glowing and her spirit bright. As her belly swelled, Jake found himself overcome with love and protectiveness. He took over all the heavy work, insisting that Caroline rest more. She chafed at the restriction but eventually accepted it with good grace, focusing her energy on preparing their home for the baby. Caroline's father visited often, bringing supplies and advice. He was clearly delighted at the prospect of becoming a grandfather, and he and Jake built a beautiful wooden cradle together. Caroline's brother Thomas came home from law school for a visit, and pronounced himself ready to be the best uncle any child ever had. On a crisp October evening, when the leaves were turning gold and the air held the promise of winter, Caroline's labor began. Jake had been prepared for this, had attended enough animal births to know what to expect, but nothing could have prepared him for the terror and helplessness of watching his wife in pain. The doctor and the midwife arrived quickly, shooing Jake out of the bedroom with instructions to boil water and stay out of the way. Jake paced the kitchen like a caged animal, jumping at every sound from the bedroom. Robert Winters arrived at some point and sat with him, providing silent support. "She is strong," Robert said quietly. "She will be fine." "She has to be," Jake replied, his voice raw. "I cannot lose her, I cannot." "You will not." Robert gripped his shoulder. "Have faith." The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Jake prayed more that night than he had in his entire life, making bargains with God, promising anything if Caroline and the baby would just be all right. Then, as dawn was breaking over the eastern hills, a baby's cry split the air. Jake's head jerked up, his heart in his throat. The bedroom door opened and the midwife emerged, smiling tiredly. "You have a son, Mr. Maddox. A big, healthy boy, and your wife is doing just fine. Come and meet your family." Jake's legs felt like water, but he made it to the bedroom. Caroline was propped up on pillows, pale and exhausted but more beautiful than he had ever seen her. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket, and when she looked up at Jake, her smile was incandescent. "Jake, come meet our son," she whispered. Jake approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. Caroline pulled back the blanket, revealing a small red face with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved in the air. The baby's eyes were closed, but even so, Jake felt his heart crack wide open with a love so fierce it almost hurt. "He is perfect," Jake breathed, carefully sitting on the edge of the bed. "Caroline, he is absolutely perfect." "Do you want to hold him?" Caroline asked. With infinite care, Jake took his son into his arms. The baby was so light, so fragile, and yet Jake could feel the strength in that small body, the vitality. His son. His and Caroline's. "We made him," Jake said wonderingly. "We made this perfect little person." "We did." Caroline reached out to touch their son's cheek. "What should we name him?" "We talked about so many names, but now that he is here, I cannot decide." Jake studied his son's face, thinking, "What about Matthew, after your mother's father?" Tears filled Caroline's eyes. "Matthew Maddox, I love it. Hello, Matthew, welcome to the world, little one." Baby Matthew opened his eyes then, revealing dark blue depths that seemed to look right through Jake. And in that moment, Jake understood a new kind of love, different from what he felt for Caroline but no less powerful. This was his son, his child, and he would protect him and cherish him for all the days of his life. The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Matthew was a good baby, healthy and happy, and he grew like a weed. Jake discovered he loved being a father, loved everything from changing diapers to walking the floor with Matthew in the middle of the night. Caroline was a natural mother, patient and loving, and watching her with their son only deepened Jake's love for her. Thunder, surprisingly, became very protective of the baby. He would hang his head over the corral fence whenever Caroline brought Matthew outside, watching over them like a guardian. Matthew, for his part, showed no fear of the big horse, laughing and reaching for Thunder's soft nose. "He is going to be a horseman like his father," Caroline predicted, watching Matthew's interaction with Thunder. "Maybe," Jake said, swinging an arm around her shoulders. "Or maybe he will be a shopkeeper like his grandfather or a lawyer like his uncle. Whatever he wants to be, we will support him." "Look at you being a modern parent," Caroline teased, leaning into him. "I learned from the best," Jake replied, kissing the top of her head. Life settled into a new rhythm. The ranch continued to prosper, and Jake's reputation as a horse trainer brought steady work. They hired a young man named David to help with the heavy labor, giving Jake more time with his family. Caroline eventually went back to helping at her father's store a few hours a week, with Matthew strapped to her back in a carrier Jake had made. When Matthew was 2, Caroline became pregnant again. This time, she gave birth to a daughter they named Grace, for the grace that had brought Jake and Caroline together. Grace had her mother's green eyes and blonde hair, and she was as calm and sweet-natured as Matthew was energetic and curious. "We have been blessed," Caroline said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Matthew chase fireflies while Grace dozed in her arms. "So incredibly blessed." "We have," Jake agreed. He looked at his wife, his children, his land, and felt contentment settle deep in his bones. "I never imagined I could be this happy, Caroline. Before I met you, I was just existing, moving from place to place without purpose. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Caroline corrected gently. "You gave me adventure and passion and a love I never dreamed I would find. You saw me as more than just someone's daughter or someone's potential wife. You saw me as myself." "Because you are extraordinary," Jake said simply. "You were the only one who could calm Thunder, and I figured you could calm my heart as well. I was right." Caroline's eyes shimmered with tears. "I love you, Jake Maddox. I will love you until my dying day and beyond." "And I love you, Caroline Maddox, always and forever." They kissed as the sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Matthew ran up then, demanding attention, and Grace woke with a little cry. Jake and Caroline separated with a laugh and turned their attention to their children, but their hands remained clasped, their bond as strong as ever. The years rolled on, bringing new challenges and new joys. Matthew grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with his mother's intelligence and compassion. He did indeed become a horseman, working alongside Jake to build the ranch into one of the most respected horse breeding operations in Texas. Grace grew into a beautiful and spirited young woman who shocked everyone by declaring she wanted to be a doctor. With her parents' full support, she went east to study medicine, one of the first women to do so. Jake and Caroline added 2 more children to their family over the years, another son named Robert after Caroline's father, and a daughter named Sarah. The ranch house was expanded to accommodate their growing family, and the sound of children's laughter became a constant backdrop to their lives. Thunder lived to the grand old age of 28, siring dozens of foals who carried his bloodline throughout Texas and beyond. When he finally passed away peacefully in his sleep, Jake and Caroline mourned him like a member of the family. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, and Jake carved a simple headstone that read, "Thunder, he brought us together." Robert Winters lived to see all his grandchildren grown, passing away peacefully at the age of 76 with Caroline holding his hand. Jake grieved with his wife, remembering the man who had given him a chance and welcomed him into his family. As Jake and Caroline aged, they became pillars of the redemption community. Jake served on the town council and helped establish a school. Caroline organized charitable efforts and became known for her kindness and wisdom. But through it all, they remained first and foremost partners, their love deepening with each passing year. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party. The ranch was filled with friends and family, with grandchildren running underfoot and food covering every available surface. As the sun began to set, Jake led Caroline away from the crowd to their favorite spot, the porch where they had spent so many evenings together. 30 years, Caroline marveled, her hand in his. Her hair was silver now, her face lined, but to Jake she was as beautiful as the day he had first seen her leaning against the corral fence. "Can you believe it? Sometimes it feels like yesterday," Jake said, pulling her close. "Sometimes it feels like forever in the best possible way, like I cannot remember a time when you were not the center of my world." "I feel the same." Caroline rested her head on his shoulder. "We have built a good life, Jake, a really good life." "The best life," Jake agreed. "And it all started with a wild horse, and a woman brave enough to calm him. And a cowboy smart enough to realize she could calm his heart too," Caroline added with a smile. Jake cupped her face in his weathered hands, looking deep into those green eyes he had loved for 3 decades. "I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every moment, every challenge, every joy, all of it as long as it was with you." "Me too," Caroline whispered. "Always you, Jake, always." They kissed as the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors, and from somewhere in the distance, they could hear their children laughing and their grandchildren playing. The ranch that Jake had built with his own hands, that Caroline had helped turn into a home, stretched out around them in all directions. It was not just land anymore. It was legacy. It was love made solid and real. As full darkness fell and stars began to appear overhead, Jake and Caroline remained on the porch, wrapped in each other's arms. They did not need words anymore. After 30 years together, they communicated in touches and sighs, in the comfortable silence of 2 souls who had become one. Inside, the party continued. Matthew was telling stories about his father's horse training adventures. Grace was showing off photographs of the hospital where she worked. Robert was playing his guitar while Sarah sang. The grandchildren were running wild, sugar-drunk and happy. But out on the porch, Jake and Caroline existed in their own small world, a world they had created together out of patience and trust, and a love that had weathered every storm. "Thank you," Jake said softly, pressing a kiss to Caroline's silver hair, "for taking a chance on me all those years ago. For seeing something worth loving in a cowboy with nothing but a difficult horse and a dream." "Thank you," Caroline replied, snuggling closer, "for being exactly the man I needed, for building this life with me, for loving me so well." They sat there until late into the night, holding each other under the stars, surrounded by the evidence of their love. The ranch they had built, the family they had raised, the community they had served. All of it stemming from a moment 30 years ago when a young woman had walked into a corral and calmed a wild horse, and a cowboy had recognized that she could calm his restless heart as well. And as Jake drifted off to sleep that night with Caroline warm beside him, he sent up a prayer of gratitude for every twist of fate that had brought them together. For the poker game that had won him thunder. For the decision to come to redemption. For Caroline's willingness to help a stranger with his horse. For every moment, large and small, that had led him to this life, this love, this profound and abiding happiness. The Wild West had been a hard place, full of danger and uncertainty. But it had also given Jake Maddox the greatest gift he could have imagined. A woman who saw past his rough exterior to the man beneath, who stood beside him through every trial, who loved him with a fierce and unwavering devotion that had only grown stronger with time. She had been the only one who could calm his horse, and she had indeed calmed his heart, filling it so full of love that it overflowed into every corner of his life. Together, they had built something beautiful and lasting, a testament to the power of patience, trust, and true love. And so Jake and Caroline Maddox lived out their days in the home they had made, surrounded by the family they had created, secure in the knowledge that they had found in each other everything they had ever needed. Their love story became legend in redemption, passed down through generations as an example of what real partnership looked like. And Thunder, the wild horse who had brought them together, was remembered with gratitude and fondness, forever a part of the foundation upon which their happiness was built. The end.